I'm here, I've been asked to introduce it because I've been involved with the Northern Ireland Mixed Marriage Association since its inception in 1974. And we are an organisation who try and assist and support people who have particular difficulties with getting married, getting their children baptised, and just arranging their family so that they don't split completely on the subject. So I've been asked to introduce this, and I'm very pleased to do that. I am going to introduce Katrina Lloyd first, who is a research director of ARK, based in the School of Sociology, Social Policy and Social Work at Queen's University Belfast, where I once worked. There you are. And next, Gillian Robinson is director of ARK and INCOR at the University of Ulster, and NICVA has been involved with Gillian for many years and found her a very great enlightened person who sort of sent us off to look down different pathways, and we hope that we have been of some benefit to you. So I'm not sure who's going to speak first. Gillian is going to kick this off. I think it will be very interesting, and I look forward to your comments afterwards. Thank you, Gillian.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. And can I begin by just thanking Anne Odling-Smee from NICVA for agreeing to chair our seminar today. I first became aware of NICVA's work in the early 1990s when I was doing a big qualitative study of mixed marriage, and I became aware of their work, and I fully recognise the valuable contribution NICVA has made to supporting people in mixed relationships over the years. Perhaps I should begin by saying just a little bit about ARK. ARK's mission is to make social and political data available to all, and this seminar forms one part of our work whereby, through a range of seminars, we've had a number of speakers speak on key issues relating to social policy in Northern Ireland. And Katrina and I, as members of the ARK team, are very pleased to have this opportunity to feed into public debate on this important topic of mixed relationships. We would also like to formally thank all those funders who have supported the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey, which we're going to draw on today, and particular thanks to OFM, DFM, the Office of the First Minister, Deputy First Minister, who have funded the community relations modules over time. So our title today is Intimate Mixing, Bridging the Gap, ? Catholic-Protestant relationships in Northern Ireland. Now, I know a number of people in our audience are from outside Northern Ireland, and when you think of mixed marriage or mixed relationships, I imagine you do not think of Catholic-Protestant relationships. So we'll try to explain a little bit about how this term is used in Northern Ireland and some of the impact of being in a mixed relationship in Northern Ireland. But first, I think it's important to set the scene. Article 16 of the United Nations Convention on Human Rights states that men and women of adult age, without any limitation due to race, nationality or religion, have the right to marry and to found a family. And we can extend that to the people who choose not to marry but to live in a partnership together. Religious and ethnic conflict is evident all over the world. The rise of Muslim fundamentalism, bloodshed in the area of the former Yugoslavia, the plight of the Kurds and other indigenous peoples, the rise of neo-Nazism, attacks against guest or migrant workers across Europe, and the Northern Ireland conflict, which we hope we've now emerged from, are just a few examples of these bitter struggles. Religious intermarriage or interrelationships is a phenomenon of special interest, and couples whose relationships bridge the social divide, such as Muslim and Serb in Bosnia or Protestant and Catholic in Northern Ireland, can face a lot of opposition. Some couples can even be the tragic targets of assassination, such as a couple in South Africa who were shot just after they publicly announced their engagement. And more recent examples in Northern Ireland include threats not longer than 3 months ago in Derry, Londonderry, which is in the west of Northern Ireland, where I and some of my colleagues are based, and also recent fire bombings and targets at mixed couples' homes in Belfast area. So even today in Northern Ireland, there are real physical security risks for couples who enter into mixed relationship. Now, it's often said that marriage is not only a private, intimate relationship between two partners, but is also a social contract between the families concerned and the social groups to which they belong. Mixed marriage or relationships throws this public aspect into focus, and issues may be raised that never surface in a relationship that does not cross social boundaries. Outgroup marriage can be seen as exposing some of the tensions and constraints present in a society. Intermarriage attracts interest from many quarters and is the subject of a small but growing body of international research. In Northern Ireland, then, despite recent political developments, deep divisions still remain. People live in polarised districts. Census figures suggest that more than half the population live in areas that are more than 90% Catholic or Protestant. The education system is also divided and does little to promote intergroup contact, and only 4 to 5% of children attend formally integrated schools. Now, in today's talk, what we're going to do is look first at what definitions of mixed relationships or mixed marriages. Then we're going to summarise some of the key research to date in Northern Ireland and highlight the key issues that have come from that. I'll then explain the methodology that we've used for our own study that we're presenting today and discuss the extent of mixed marriage in Northern Ireland. Katrina is then going to present our key findings, and we're going to conclude with some questions regarding the future of mixed marriage in Northern Ireland. So the first thing then, definition of mixed marriage or mixed relationships. This is a tricky thing. After all, what's regarded as mixed in one culture at one time may not be regarded as posing any problems in another society or at another period of history. For example, a marriage between a Catholic and a Protestant in 2008 is not seen as a problem in Paris, but is considered to be by some people in Northern Ireland. There are many forms of intermarriage, and other researchers, Bloy, Becker and Fitzpatrick, list over 9 social frontiers which marriages can span, which include race, nationality, mother tongue, region of birth, class or caste. Looking at terminology, the term religious intermarriage or interrelationship strictly means between a Christian and non-Christian, although it takes on a local meaning depending on the context and issues foremost in the society in question. For example, mixed marriage relationships in Northern Ireland will mean between the two main communities, Catholic and Protestant, and in England it may mean between black and white people. But these terms can again be criticised for being too general, as there are, for instance, very many different Protestant denominations and different ethnic groups within the broad categories black and white. Barbara, writing in the late 1980s, rejected the term mixed marriages as he argues it enshrines an ideology of difference. With marriage or relationships between people of different religious backgrounds, the term interfaith or interchurch implies a degree of active involvement in religion which may not necessarily be presumed, as I pointed out in some earlier research I was involved in. And therefore I would suggest that in Northern Ireland the term cross-community marriage is perhaps a better term. But nonetheless, the term in common use is mixed marriage, and this paper will talk about mixed marriage or mixed relationships. Okay. Another way to think about mixed relationships is where you've got different forms of mixing. So you've got, firstly, clearly visible mixing. So, for example, it's easy to see a couple where one member is black and one member is white, or a partnership where one partner is disabled and the other person is able-bodied, if the disability is visible, for example, a wheelchair or whatever. There's also mixing that's not clearly visible, for example, educational, cultural, intellectual, emotional, or where there's a power imbalance. And the third sort of mixing that Kasuta refers to is mixing that's made apparent by the external situation. The mixing depends more on the external situation than on inner dynamics, and a typical example of that is a marriage between a Catholic and a Protestant. Now, there's been relatively little research relating to mixed marriage carried out in Northern Ireland, and a lot of it in the early years was confined to small samples in rural areas, such as Leighton, Buffwhack, McFarlane. Lee carried out a study in Belfast, and in 1992 I was involved with a fairly substantive qualitative study involving 96 individuals. From all of this research, which was then followed by Morgan Smith, Grace Fraser and myself, Wanda Wigfall-Williams, who will actually is an American scholar who's presenting next week, and I'll give you the details of her seminar at the end. Who's just completed her PhD thesis, and of course Richard O'Leary at Queen's and some of his colleagues have done a lot of work in the Republic of Ireland focus. But in general, a lot of this research has focused on qualitative studies, and in general cross-community marriage has been shown to be problematic, to be socially unacceptable, with couples facing opposition from families and from churches. And as I've said already, at worst, mixed relationships have invited physical violence or even murder. McFarlane found that mixed marriage was thought to damage the social standing of the families concerned as well as that of the couple. that intermarriage would add to a family strain and could make the couple targets of assassination. Even where a partner attempted to smooth out the differences by converting to the religion of their partner, in that case they still may be regarded with suspicion and accorded less respect than someone who does not give up their religious background. The question of any children arising from the relationship was also seen as problematic. On perhaps a more optimistic note, my research in the early 90s found that little opposition was encountered by couples at work and that family relations usually calmed down. So there might have been initial family opposition to the union, but eventually families settled down. And with the arrival of grandchildren, they proved to be, if you like, the key that grandparents loved their grandchildren regardless of the fact that they may have been initially opposed to the relationship or the marriage. There's also been some international research done trying to compare Northern Ireland with other parts of the world, and Hastings Dunn in 1990 looked at mixed marriage in Northern Ireland and Pakistan. He found that findings there were that mixed marriage were associated with more problems in Northern Ireland than they were in Pakistan. Pragmatic reasons, according to him, accounted for this. Pakistan has a clear Muslim majority of 97% and was not divided by religion as Northern Ireland society is. Secondly, the outcome of intermarriage is clear-cut in Pakistan as men control religious upbringing, unlike in Northern Ireland where the outcome is ambiguous and puts the relative authority of men and women in home to the test. So that's the research. As I said, there's a lot of issues that have come up, some of which have attempted to be answered and some which are yet to be answered and where we need more study, I would suggest. Who enters into mixed relationships? Because most of the studies that have been carried out have been done with small samples, and using a qualitative methodology, it's very difficult to generalise about who has actually entered into mixed marriages. Compton and Coward in the late 1989 expected and wrote that they expected that higher rates of mixed marriage would be found among the middle classes as they tend to live in more integrated areas and may have travelled more and have a wider educational experience, possibly producing a more liberal perspective. However, they found no major differences. Other research outside Northern Ireland has shown that increased education impacts on choices people make, and that with increased education there may be more liberal attitudes which may make people more open to mixed relationships. But in Northern Ireland we have anecdotal evidence, or to date we've had only anecdotal evidence, and part of our research has been to try to address that question. Okay, social attitudes. The society in which we live invariably impacts upon our choices and impacts upon our lives. Attitudes and expectations about mixed marriages are varied. On the positive side, partners and families in mixed marriage may manage the difference that a community has not yet bridged and may derive enrichment in terms of culture and language. A relationship that accepts and builds on difference may be deeper and more mature than one that only allows similarity. There's also a feeling that a certain amount of mixed marriage is healthy for society, and Hastings goes so far as to warn that if two groups live in close proximity and there is no marriage, then there may be war. Further understanding of this point may be given by the rationale behind exogamy and endogamy, where the aim of endogamy is to maintain group boundaries and reinforce group ties, while the goal of exogamy is to create new links and extend boundaries. On the negative side, intermarriage and relationships have connotations of being problematic, fraught with stresses for the couple and their families, and eventually threatening the survival of the group if they're already a minority. So, one question, this is, and we're not going to go through all the findings and attitudes, that's not the purpose of today's seminar, but one question that we've asked over the years since 1989 has asked whether people would mind a lot if their relative married a person of a different religion. Now, we've asked that question in two ways. Firstly, we asked, do you think other people in Northern Ireland would mind if a relative of theirs married someone from a different religion? And you can see that in 1989, the blue line is up at 35%, and that drops down to about 17-18% in 1998. But then it goes up a little bit and really has remained very steady over the years. There's been very little change. We asked the question a second way, which says, what about you personally? Would you mind if a relative of yours Now, of course, we always see ourselves as being more liberal than everybody else out there, so it's not a surprise to see that when the green line is below the blue line. But again, that figure dropped a little bit in the early years, went up again a little bit, but hasn't shown any dramatic change over time. And if you think of the Northern Ireland situation, ceasefires, political agreement, now devolved government, you might wonder why that is. Other issues, again, that we don't have time to go into, but that are important to just highlight to you, is the response of the churches. And Anne and her colleagues would be much better placed to give you the detail on this. But there's two important aspects around the response of the churches to people in mixed relationships and those who wish to enter mixed marriages. The first thing is the formal position of the churches, and the second thing is the attitudes of the clergy and the couple's dealings with them. So what constitutes a valid marriage is different between the Catholic and Protestant churches. The Catholic Church does not regard a marriage as valid unless vows are exchanged before a priest with witnesses, and you need a dispensation from a special dispensation to permit any other type of wedding. In years gone by, there was also a requirement by the Catholic Church that the Protestant partner would sign an agreement that children would be brought up in the Catholic faith. That changed in 1973, 73?
And 83 particularly.
Right, and 83. And while that did formally change, it still remains in the memories of a lot of people, and not everyone is perhaps clear that there is no longer a need to make a written promise. So strong reactions have been voiced about the situation. People feel that perhaps some of the Catholic Church teachings in the past have contributed to driving a wedge between the two communities in Northern Ireland and indeed Ireland. But obviously as well, the Protestant churches have had their part to play in the situation. Some writers have argued that if the churches fully recognised each other, there would be no problem with interchurch marriage, and that mixed marriage is only considered problematical where there is partial recognition or rejection of the other church involved. Coventry, writing in the 70s, sums up, "The churches are the problem for the couple and should not think of the couple as the problem for them." So while churches have a formal policy on mixed marriage, this can be subject to variable interpretation, and this is shown in the individual responses of the clergy. Little research has addressed the attitudes of the clergy themselves. But it is fair to say that while the situation seems to be much easier for many couples now wanting to enter into mixed marriage, in that they can perhaps arrange a service where both a priest and a minister from their particular Protestant denomination are willing to take part, it is also true that in some Protestant churches, individual ministers may refuse to take part in services or may refuse to go into the other denomination's church to take part. So for some people there are still some issues around that, and even within my own family circle I know cases in the last year where people have had to go to other churches to try to arrange a mixed marriage in the format that they would want. So this is very real. It's not, sometimes I think that this has all gone away, but it hasn't. People actually still experience quite a lot of difficulties on the ground in terms of identifying or setting up a marriage in the way that they would like it. Okay, the next decision is where to live. I've already said Northern Ireland's a very segregated society. So if you're a mixed couple, where do you live? At the time of my research in 1990, this was best expressed by a couple who did their market research by driving around Belfast to find where all the flags were during the marching season. So they went to see what area was what and who was flying what flags, and were trying to find an area where there were no flags flying, where they would feel safe and comfortable. This also still continues in Northern Ireland, so people do have to think about where they'll be safe and where they can go. That may extend to what part of the town or city they live in, or it may be even wider than that they may feel they should move to another town or city because they're now in a mixed relationship and are choosing to set up homes together. So that's a very, very important issue. The other thing that we need to mention briefly is about children, and Katrina will talk a little bit more about children and schooling later on. But having a child is a big decision for any couple, but for a mixed marriage couple it can be an even bigger one, with the families on either side wanting to know where the children are going to be baptised. Is it going to be in the Catholic Church? Is it going to be in a Protestant church? Is it going to be in any church at all? etc., etc. So that can be a big issue, and that can add to pressures on family life. Also, when you come to send your child to school, where do you send them to school? The school system is segregated into, for the people not from Northern Ireland, there are the state schools, which are de facto Protestant, and the Catholic school sector, and there is a small integrated school movement. But if you live in an area where there's not an integrated school, what do you do? How do you choose to send your child? Even if he or she has been brought up in one denomination, they do come from a mixed relationship, and that may cause problems. And children we've spoken to and heard from, have talked about being teased and taunted at a variety of schools because of the fact that they come from a mixed relationship, and so on. Okay, in terms of the successes of mixed marriage, this has been very little looked at, but some people have claimed that the additional pressures placed on people choosing to enter into mixed marriage or a mixed relationship mean that the relationships break down more. There's absolutely no evidence that we can find that supports or refutes that, but that has been expressed in the past. And if you think of the difficulties couples face in everyday life without the additional pressures of living in a divided society, perhaps we can understand that that's that. Okay, now having sort of set, yes please?
What about mixed marriages that involve religions other than Catholicism and Protestantism? Like what if you had a Catholic and a Jew, or a Protestant and a Buddhist? Would they face in Northern Ireland the same kind of social condemnation and pressure, or would they kind of be off the radar?
Off the radar, I think is the answer in short. I mean, in Northern Ireland has only very recently become more diverse. Until 10 years ago, we had very, very, very small numbers of people from any other ethnic group living here. Now that has changed and is changing very, very quickly, and it will be interesting to see how this develops over time. But to date, I'm not aware of any extensive research that's been done looking at that. I mean, for example, in our survey, which I'm going to talk about now, we have less than 1% of the people responding to the survey in any year are from a non-Christian background. There's about 12% who say they have no religion, but there's a very small number of people who identify as being something else. So we have no empirical evidence on that. But there are other people working in the area here who may want to add something later on in response to that. But by and large, mixed marriage in Northern Ireland means Catholic-Protestant, and there have been very low numbers of anybody else to marry. So it's not been. Well, I think that's true. Okay. Now, the aim of this seminar, what I've said to date, is just really sort of setting the scene and painting a picture. What we want to do in this seminar is simply to do one thing, and that is to look at the characteristics and some of the attitudes of people who've chosen to enter into a mixed marriage in Northern Ireland. Because most of the research has been done on small qualitative studies, we've always had a presumption about who enters into mixed marriage, but we haven't known. So now we've been able to create a way to look at who actually is entering mixed marriage. So what we've done is we have a survey that runs every year called the Northern Ireland Life and Times Survey. This is an annual attitudinal survey which began in 1998. It's a descendant of the Northern Ireland Social Attitude Survey, which ran here from 89 to 96, and it monitors the attitudes and behaviour of people in Northern Ireland. So we have quite a long time series of data. And what we've done is we've taken 8 years of the data from 1998 to 2005. That's 8 years data. We've pulled it all together, and where we've got similar questions, we've been able to create a big pooled data set. So between 1989 and 2005, we've asked the question, is your husband, wife, partner the same religion as you? And the responses to that have varied from 6% in 1989 to 12% last year. And over the years it has fluctuated. It's been 8, 10, 11. The year before, in 2004, it was 8%. So it's not gone up steadily, but what we've picked up is probably a small gradual increase in the number of people who report that they're in a mixed marriage or mixed relationship. But in any one year, we have about a sample of 1,200 people. So if we have 10% in a mixed relationship, then we maybe only have 100 people. That's not enough to do any analysis on. So what we've done is we've pulled the data together. So we've now got a data set which has a total of over 8,000 respondents who say they're in a relationship. And of those 8,000, 802 are in a mixed relationship. Okay, so we've now got a data set that we've got 802 people who tell us they're in a mixed relationship. That's 10% of the total overall. And with 802 people, we're in a position to analyse and discuss and look at some of the differences and some of the characteristics of people in a mixed relationship. Now, some of you may be wondering, those of you who know the Life and Times data, well, why aren't we reporting 2006 data? Well, we changed our question in 2006. Some of you will say, is your husband, wife, partner the same religion as you? What does that mean? In the past in Northern Ireland, that meant he or she was a Catholic or a Protestant, the opposite of you. But now, with increasing diversity, we need to ask the question in a different way so that we can begin to pick up what you've just pointed out. So we now ask a question, what is your spouse's or partner's religion? So it's a different question. So we're just using these 8 years. Okay, so robust quantitative data hasn't been available to date, and the evidence that we have now been able to create through this provides us with some opportunity for more rigorous quantitative analysis, and Katrina is going to take us through that. Oh, I missed it. No. Sorry.
Okay, thanks very much, Gillian. What I'm going to do first is look at the characteristics of people living in mixed religion relationships and the extent to which they differ from people who choose to live in relationships with people who are the same religion as themselves. These variables come from the background section on Life and Times, and they are asked every year. Some of them have also been shown in sort of more qualitative research, as Gillian mentioned, to be related to mixed religion relationships in previous research carried out in Northern Ireland. So in terms of age, you can see that respondents who were in mixed religion relationships tended to be younger than those who were in same religion partnerships. So you can see it's particularly under the age of 35. 26% of those in mixed religion relationships were under 35 compared to 15%. And at the other end of the scale, of the age scale, you can see that 17% of those in same religion partnerships were over the age of 65, compared with only 6% of those who were in mixed religion relationships. They were also less likely to be married, and given what Gillian has discussed earlier, I think you'd probably say, well, that's no wonder, you know, with all the issues that are around getting married in Northern Ireland if you're in a mixed relationship. And coming from one myself, I do know a little bit about this. So, as you can see, around about 3 times as many people who were in mixed religion relationships chose not to marry as those who were in same religion partnerships. Now, we need to have a look at the age of people, obviously, because it's become much more socially acceptable now to be living together and not to be married. And if you look at this, I think this is shown quite clearly that at the older age, people tend to be married, whether they're in mixed relationships or same religion relationships. But among the younger people, you can see that there is a difference, and these differences were statistically significant, and many fewer of those in mixed religion relationships than those in same religion relationships are married. It could be younger people are sort of, because of this issue around where to get married, but we don't actually know that. We don't actually ask people, why is it that you're not married? We've never included that question. So it's only speculation as to why that is. There's been some mixed results within the research literature as to whether mixed marriage is predominantly a middle class phenomenon. Previous studies that have looked at this have tended to focus on qualitative research with married couples only. So we did find a little bit of support for this in the pooled data set from the Life and Times. So you can see from here, from this, that people who were in mixed religion relationships tended to have higher incomes than those who were in same religion relationships. So 48% of those in same religion relationships compared to 37% of those in mixed religion relationships had incomes that were less than £10,000 a year. And at the other end of the income scale, 7% of those in same religion compared with 11% of those in mixed religion relationships had incomes that were £30,000 and above. They were also more likely to be better qualified, have better educational qualifications. People in mixed religion relationships had higher A level and higher. I mean, that's just what I selected to look at. they were more likely to have these higher educational qualifications. In fact, 20% of those who were in mixed religion relationships had a degree or higher, compared with 12% of those who were in same religion relationships. I think these findings are interesting because some previous research in Northern Ireland has shown that higher educational levels are generally associated with more moderate attitudes towards people from different backgrounds. And the contact at the university level can have a positive effect on people's attitudes towards the other religious group. In fact, often, I think the research that Gillian did, young people who go to university, sometimes that's the first time in Northern Ireland that they've ever met anyone who's of a different religion to them. So I think those findings are interesting in the context of that. However, what we didn't find was any significant relationship in terms of social class. And this was measured it's based on the respondent's current or most recent job, and it's measured using the Registrar General's standard classification of occupations. So there were slight differences, but they were not statistically significant in terms of social class. Reflecting the age difference that we noted earlier, I think is probably part of the findings from that you see on this slide, in that there were very many fewer people in mixed religion relationships who were retired compared to those who were in same religion relationships, and many more of those in mixed religion partnerships were employed. Now, we reran that analysis and based it on just those people who were of working age, and there was actually still a statistically significant difference. People in mixed religion relationships were more likely to be employed than people who were in same religion relationships. Okay. As well as looking at the characteristics of people in mixed religion relationships, we were also interested in the type of contact they might have had with people who were not of the same religious background as them, from the same communities as them. And we've used some questions from Life and Times to just tease out whether people who are in mixed religion relationships were more likely to have had contact with people not of the same religion as them than those who were in same religion partnerships. And the two questions we asked people, these are asked in Life and Times every year. Have you ever lived outside Northern Ireland for more than 6 months? And have you ever attended an integrated or a mixed religion school in Northern Ireland? And what the data show is that people in mixed religion partnerships were significantly more likely to say that they had lived outside Northern Ireland for more than 6 months than those in same religion partnerships. And this difference was statistically significant. The only thing we don't know is whether this took place before the relationship started or after the relationship started, but nevertheless there is evidence that they have spent time outside Northern Ireland. Again, more of them, statistically significant, it's not a large difference, but the people in mixed religion relationships were more likely to say they had attended an integrated or a fairly mixed school than those who were in same religion partnerships. And given what Gillian was talking about earlier, it's interesting when you look at the respondents, as well as being asked if they had attended a formally integrated school or a mixed school themselves, they were asked if they had ever had a child in their care who attended a mixed religion or integrated school. And you can see from this, I think it's clear that mixed religion schools appear to provide the kind of educational environment maybe that mixed religion people want for their children, because almost twice as many respondents who were in mixed religion partnerships as those who were in same religion partnerships said that a child in their care had attended a mixed school or integrated school in Northern Ireland. Another thing that we were interested in looking at was the attitudes of respondents in mixed religion partnerships in relation to their ideas on politics and national identity. The main reason why we looked at this was because previous research in Northern Ireland, work done by Bernie Hayes and colleagues, has shown that people who attended mixed religion schools in Northern Ireland appeared to have less sectarian sort of attitudes, and they were more likely to reject traditional national identities and political allegiances than people who didn't attend a mixed school. And one of the things we were interested in looking at was there a similar association in relation to people in mixed religion partnerships. So we looked at two variables that are asked every year. Which Northern Ireland party do you support? And do you think of yourself as a unionist, a nationalist, or neither? And as this table shows, more people who were in mixed religion partnerships than those who weren't said they supported the Alliance Party, which is perceived in Northern Ireland to be a slightly more moderate, middle-of-the-road party than some of the other parties that are in Northern Ireland. And they were also much more likely than respondents in same religion partnerships to say that they were neither nationalist nor unionist, so they're rejecting these traditional sort of identities that can be common in Northern Ireland. And that difference is extremely large and statistically significant. And I think something that Gillian and I talked about is something that's worth maybe exploring in further in future research. Okay, those are the findings that we're going to present today, and I'm going to hand over to Gillian now, who's going to talk about some of the conclusions that we can draw from the findings of this research.
Great, thank you, Katrina. I'm going to be very quick in terms of trying to sum up. The research that Katrina's presented from our data sets proves that the well-established findings from elsewhere, that persons with higher level of education are more likely to enter intermarriages, and this is also associated with people who are earning more money, although social class itself was not statistically significant. In summary, trends on religious intermarriage suggest that mixed marriage is increasing in other countries and religions. Statistics from our study show that there's been a little bit of an increase in the numbers of mixed marriages, but it's not gone up exponentially. So the evidence we have suggests a very slow rise, but the levels still remain low. So, and then although cross-community marriage may be increasing in Northern Ireland, in general attitudes may have become a little bit more tolerant, but many couples still face opposition from families and churches. When we think about the future of mixed marriage in Northern Ireland, writing back in 1990, Dunn said, mixed unions are more acceptable politically at some times rather than others, and that the numbers of such unions is more likely to increase in times of diminishing sectarian tension and conflict. Now, I suppose when we think about that, what we have in Northern Ireland at the minute is a reduction of the violence. However, we still have sectarian tension and conflict, so maybe we're not yet at a place where we might see an increase in mixed marriages, or perhaps we may never see an increase. There are other societies that are peaceful, such as Mauritius, that are fairly mixed in terms of population, but where mixed marriage itself is not very high. So just because there is no violence and people don't have to contend with the divides that exist in Northern Ireland does not mean that they will choose to enter into mixed relationships. The other thing that's changing in Northern Ireland, and we've alluded to it, is the increasing diversity in Northern Ireland population. How will that impact upon mixed marriage and mixed relationships? And will the impact of Northern Ireland people, be they Catholic or Protestant, marrying into Christian, non-Christian relationships or mixed race relationships, will that impact on the traditional issues and experience of people who enter into Catholic-Protestant marriages? We've been talking since the Life and Times survey began in '98 about increasing secularisation in Northern Ireland and the impact that that may have. We still find that the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland, although they may attend church less and be less regular church goers, that they still profess to be members of a church, and they still tend to attend church for key life events like baptisms, weddings and so on. And the numbers of people who choose to marry in church are still very high in Northern Ireland. But if we continue to see increasing secularisation, what impact may that have? And perhaps most importantly, in the changed political situation that we're in at the minute, with devolution and the possibility of political change, where parties, rather than just appealing to their own community, traditional communities, may have to try to attract votes from across the divide and may have to lobby in terms of policy and so on, rather than just appealing to their own community. Will that impact on mixed marriage and so on? We have no way of knowing at this stage, but I think there are a lot of interesting things about people in Northern Ireland, or about mixed marriage in Northern Ireland. When Katrina and I were writing this paper, we always came back to the question about what is it that we're hoping for in relation to mixed marriage, we ourselves. And for us, it's about Northern Ireland becoming a place where people are free to enter relationships across the old traditional sectarian divide, or indeed across new race divides, without fear of attack, without having to be careful about where they live and where they send their children to school, without having to worry about who knows that they're in a mixed relationship. We would like Northern Ireland to be a society where the churches support those couples who wish to have an active involvement in their churches. And importantly, we'd like it to be a society where we value couples in mixed relationships and learn from them in terms of how they live their lives together, finding ways to break down sectarian prejudice and thereby reducing intersectarian tension and antagonism. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you both very much. All topics on this subject open new doors where you have to go and explore another area. So that was very fascinating for me because I must have read most of that research, I think. Now, we can open this up to the floor, and if anybody would like to ask questions, I'm sure you will be delighted to do so, won't you?
Yes.
Yes. So,
I have a quick question. What was the original name of the survey?
The Northern Ireland Social Attitudes Survey. We will have...
there's a gentleman just there.
The research update will be available online. It just wasn't available. It is available online, so it contains all details and links. Okay?
Thanks. Chris Morris here from DSC. A couple of points. One is it possible that the greater number of pensioners represented in the single religion marriages could impact on the income distribution? And the second is in reference to what you said about research on the durability and success of mixed marriages. I think there is some background work which was done on children who are being cared for, and that would seem to suggest quite strongly that the greater proportion of children who come from mixed partnerships amongst children in care argues that there is stress.
oh, yes.
But
Okay. Well,
Can I come back on that?
certainly. Sure.
That one particularly interests me because my background is in social work and childcare, actually. And when reading that, the thing that the reason, one of the main reasons why it was very difficult for the children was because there was no support from the families. Because at that level, if you were living on estates, the family split and you went to two separate places, and the children really couldn't travel between very often. I mean, all these things are, not necessarily all the time, but that was a huge difference, that very many people in mixed marriages do not have the support of their families. And so if there is stress and tension, or there's difficulties, or there's sickness, or there's illness, or anything else, they don't have that support. But that's not throughout, but it is in certain places, and I think that was evident in that research. Sorry.
Yeah, yes, we didn't do the analysis on that, but yes, certainly that's a possibility. Yeah.
The other thing about the pensioners is that Anne was, as you'll have noted, we had fewer couples in mixed relationships in the older age groups, and Anne was suggesting to me that possibly is impacted on by the fact that so many couples left Northern Ireland. They did not feel they could live here and they could be safe here and they could rear their family here. So some couples in the sort of 60s and 70s chose to leave Northern Ireland because they were in a mixed relationship and they felt it wasn't safe. So that may impact on our distribution there as well.
You were actually given a dispensation to marry if you went away to do it. Because if you did it here, it was a scandal. So there's somebody at the far end there, and then somebody here.
This is sort of a two-parter question. Firstly, were there any gay and lesbian couples that were included in this survey? And if not, has there been any research on the intermixing in the gay and lesbian community?
The Northern Ireland Social Attitude Survey is an annual survey, a random sample population of the population in Northern Ireland. It picks up about 1,200 responses each year, and within that sample, we have a sexual orientation question. We do ask people about their sexual orientation, but we will be picking up very, very small numbers. So the sample may include some gay and lesbian couples, but we haven't identified them separately, and it will be very small numbers. And I'm not aware, I mean, there may be other research that other people in the room are familiar with looking at that, but I'm not familiar with it personally.
Thank you. This person that they...
Hi, thanks. Alan Leonard with the Northern Ireland Foundation. Just a couple little anecdotes for the serious question. One is that upon my marriage, I was once teased and said, well, you know, Alan, some would say that a marriage between a Methodist and a Presbyterian in Northern Ireland is a mixed marriage. So you get denominational mixing as well. The other is, in a previous hat, giving lectures on genealogy, Irish genealogy, and the value of newspaper clippings. The one I always like to use is the one, it was about 100 years ago, and it was the announcement of a marriage. It was a mixed marriage, and you know, it's all formally described about the daughter of so and so, etc. But you read the first paragraph, and they were married in a Catholic church. You read the second paragraph, and you learn that they immediately left that service and went to the Protestant church and got married again. And then they had a joint reception. So, and like I say, this was over 100 years ago that we use. My serious question is, you touched on Mauritius. I'm curious about the relevant international comparisons, and that citation of Mauritius quite intrigues me. But I'm just wondering, you know, how does Northern Ireland compare with other areas of like deep divisions, and not necessarily on religion, but if it's on caste or race? I'd be curious to learn a bit more. Thanks.
Well, there has been a number of studies done in different parts of the world. I mentioned Mauritius not because I'm any expert on it, but because a few years ago we held a conference on mixed marriage here in Northern Ireland, and we invited papers from internationals, and one of the speakers, no, in fact this speaker actually gave this paper at a conference we held in Moscow, but anyway, he spoke about Mauritius, and it was very interesting because it is a very mixed society with a number of different ethnic groups living there. But in fact, the rate of intermarriage, there's no violence, and there's, as far as I can tell, not having had the pleasure of being there, there's no, there's not very much tension or tension between the different groups, but yet people still choose to marry within their own ethnic group. So the rates, some papers have sort of suggested that if the divides are not that extreme, that there will be more mixed marriage, but Mauritius doesn't demonstrate that. There's been a lot of research done in Bosnia and that part of the world following the conflicts there, because, as you'll know, families were completely torn asunder, and it was a very difficult situation, and families are still experiencing the aftermath of that. So there has been interesting work on that, and I can certainly give you references to it, but I'm not, you know, I've read a lot of the work, but I can give you the references to it. But,
is there anything more local, say Scotland or the Republic?
The Republic of Ireland is interesting, and Richard O'Leary at Queen's is probably one of the main researchers who has done work on that. In fact, he brought out a very interesting paper with a Finnish collaborator, which looked at Church of Ireland marriage in Dublin and a particular group in Finland, where he argues the opposite to us, which is what we're saying here, that our evidence proves that higher educational levels will lead to people being more likely to be in a mixed marriage. He says the opposite, that elite minority groups in societies, like say the Church of Ireland in Dublin, are more likely to be better educated, to be in certain professions, to have their own sports clubs or whatever it might be, and so they're more likely to meet other people from their own sort and marry their own. And the same with this particular group in Finland. But that's the only piece of research, and I think it came out in 2002 or 2003. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you, sorry. Sorry, Richard, I'm looking at you and didn't see it. Richard might want to expand on that for us. Would you like to say something? Dirk, have you got the mic? Sorry. Sorry.
Just to comment on the education effect. And one of the things that strikes me with this data is that even among the mixed religion couples, only a quarter of them have higher level education. So for 3/4 of them, the college environment isn't the context where they're living. And similarly, in terms of their school background, bearing in mind some of them are older, but 84% of them attended the same religion schools. So again, their background isn't in the integrated sector, which is probably a perception that that's where they come from. And even moving on to their political affiliation, it is quite striking that the majority of them do not identify as neither nationalist or unionist, but it's also striking that the great majority of them do support the traditional religious affiliated parties. So in many respects it emphasizes the extent to which they are, have the same background and experiences and political orientation of the majority of the population. And it is interesting that you did not find few of them in not in employment, because many disadvantaged groups have much higher rates of not being in employment, and this is related to discrimination. So it does seem that the workplace hasn't been a hostile environment for them, and that's quite encouraging. Say compared to the experience of ethnic minorities in many societies. It's great to see some quantitative work in this area.
Something I wonder if I could just pick up on when you were saying the Presbyterian and the Methodist. I don't want to sound very, very pedantic and purist or anything like that, but when we're really talking about this, and particularly with the churches, this idea that you're in a different religion really sort of sends me slightly shuddery, because in actual fact we are all officially Christians. So you are actually marrying something from a different Christian tradition. And we've tried to get that into our language, and it's quite difficult because the folk thing is you're a different religion. And Brian Lampkin has written a book called Two Religions Still. He was interested in it from the point of view of the integrated schools and how people talked there. And there is this thing going on that the Reformation brought two religions. And it is quite difficult because in actual fact the liturgical Christian traditions do have a great gulf between the people who are not liturgical. So therefore the Anglicans and the Methodists would perhaps find it more easier to marry a Roman Catholic than the other traditions who would not be liturgical. But it's absolutely fascinating when you get into it. But it is actually the divisions that are drawn, and I feel very much that theology is at the bottom. People say this is religious, but the theology that has been driven by the clergy and the churches, which says you are separate, we are the one true faith, they are Antichrist. That is part of our tradition, and it's part of the folklore, really. Paul.
Thanks. Is this actually turned on? Yep. Okay. Can I explore this issue further? Because, contrary to what you said earlier on, it doesn't seem to me that integrated education makes one bit of a difference, 1% versus 2%. Because I'm inherently suspicious of this classification of fairly mixed. And indeed, we've had a conversation in this very room at a previous ARK seminar about that, where if you meet your future life partner from a different religion in a mixed school, you may well believe that it was fairly mixed, even if I was the only other person of a different religion, or you were the only person of a different religion. So if you look at actually integrated schools, a difference of 1% is clearly nothing at all. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't be better off, and this arises out of that earlier discussion, looking at housing and work, because if you live in a kind of a segregated part of, say, West Belfast or East Belfast, your chances of meeting somebody of a different religion are small to begin with. So that, I would assume, would be a kind of a much more potent factor. And for the same reason, higher education might having a degree might be a factor in more mixed marriages, because in higher education you meet people of other religions whom otherwise you wouldn't meet. But on a completely different point, is for Gillian. Is it a statistical blip, that figure in 1989 of approval rating of people marrying somebody from a different religion? Because I noticed it fell from 34% to 16%, and suddenly all the figures were kind of in the region of 16%. It looked to me like that might be an aberration. And that's particularly important for your 2001 bulletin, because I noticed you said, oh, well, it's fallen from 34 to 16. We've suddenly within a year become much more tolerant.
Yeah, thanks. That's quite a lot of different items there. I mean, obviously with survey time series data, you can always have a year that is a blip. And you're right, when we wrote the research update in 2001, we were looking at this drop, and it did seem to be a drop because it's been marked over a number of years. But then 2001 came and it went up a little bit again and it stayed up. So those years, 98, 2001, may have been blips, but nonetheless the time series overall does show, if you come from 35% down to whatever it is now, 30, that there's been a drop from one point in time to the other. So there's been some element of a reduction that can be noted in the time series. But you're right, I mean, the low year may have been affected by something else. I mean, as you know, we test the characteristics of our respondents each year against the various measures, and the year didn't seem to be particularly unusual as far as I can recall in any other measure, but perhaps in response to those questions there may have been something. I mean, I don't know if Katrina wants to say something about the integrated schools. I mean, you're quite right, the figures are very low.
But they only started in 1981 with one, and so, you know, they're now 62, so the chances of somebody going, but they weren't coming out of the schools until 1989. So, you know, it's actually, at the moment, including integrated in this means that it's a certain age group, the very latest age group, and there won't be an awful lot of them because they've grown slowly, but so if you see what I mean.
One of the things, I mean, this is just a first look at this. It's the first time it's really ever been, you know, it's been done for a long time. So what we are suggesting is that we do need further research, definitely, and in and around the area of integrated education would be one area that I think it would be useful to have further research.
Well, I mean, the sample size for those who are in a mixed marriage who've come out of an integrated school is very small. So
it's getting bigger though.
It is getting okay. I think there was a gentleman at the back had his hand up at once.
Yes, Paul Nolan from Queen's. Two questions really about party support. One following on from Richard O'Leary's point about the numbers who support the Alliance Party. Still being the minority, that most people actually still support either Unionist or Nationalist parties. Now, do we know if each partner in partnership sticks to their original communal identification? In other words, the Protestant still votes Unionist and the Catholic still votes Nationalist, or is there any transfer of allegiances in mixed marriages? And the second question is really to try and deal with what, an apparent contradiction in the statistics, because 59% identify themselves as being neither nationalist nor unionist, but if you look at their voting patterns, 68% of them vote for either nationalist or unionist.
Well, as you know, the relationship between party support and national identity is an extremely complicated one, and we just included these two questions to sort of give a flavour of what it is. We're limited by the questions that we can use from this pooled data set, because there's only a certain number of questions that have been asked every year over that period, and we've pulled those questions out. We do not ask, so if I'm being interviewed for the survey and I get asked about my voting pattern, we don't ask what does your husband or partner vote. I may or may not know or be able to answer that question, so we don't have that, unfortunately.